Hi, I'm Tiffany. Welcome to Towering TBR. If you're new, I am chronically ill and disabled. I read a wide variety of books, which you will see from this list, and today I get to film my absolute favorite video, my top 10 fiction favorites of the year. I love to make this video and I love to watch other people's videos, so if you have created a best of list, definitely link it down below so that I can check it out. I have already talked about my top 5 nonfiction picks, which I will link in the cards and in the description. Go check that out if you've missed it. Alright, I have ranked the very best books, and I'm going to include one honorable mention. It's because I read this book so late in the year that I felt like it would be a little bit of recency bias, but it's an absolutely phenomenal book, Small Rain by Garth Greenwell. This is about a man who becomes suddenly quite ill during the COVID pandemic, and he is in the hospital and has a lot of time to reflect on his life. It was absolutely wonderful, and I did a single book review for it. So if that sounds good to you, don't forget to check it out. All right, on to the official list. At number 10, I have Hamra and the Jungle of Memories by Hannah Alcoff. This is a middle grade fairy tale retelling of Little Red Riding Hood set in a Malaysian jungle. This too is set during the COVID pandemic, and we follow Hamra as she is stuck at home and she's kind of babysitting her grandma with dementia. One day she gets a bit stir crazy and decides to mess with some magic, and this sets a were-tiger after her. Ultimately, the were-tiger strikes up a deal with her. If she can find his true name, he will then restore her grandma's memories. So she grabs a friend and they set off into the jungle trying to find the were-tiger's name. This was heartfelt, wonderfully tense with some incredible foes, and just an absolute joy to read. The characters were flawed but well-rounded, and the world building in this fantastical land was exquisite. I highly recommend. I will highly recommend all of the books because, they're my favorites. That's not the only middle grade on the list. At number 9, I'm including Impossible Creatures by Katherine Rundell. This is a beautiful, fantastical story with such exquisite world building. We're following 2 children. One is a boy from the regular mundane world, and he is able to go to the magical world where he meets a young girl and her pet griffin. Something is destroying the magic in this land, and so they set off on a quest to try and figure out what's going on and how to help. The absolute best thing about this book is all of the creatures. We get a lot of information about a bunch of magical creatures, which just really helped immerse me in the setting. Not only that, but there is a bestiary at the end, which is like encyclopedia pages about the different magical creatures, whether or not they're friendly to humans, what they eat, where they live, just stuff like that. And I absolutely love this. There is going to be a sequel coming out in September, I think, next year, and I am really excited. I can't wait. At number 8, I'm putting Not Till We Are Lost by Dennis E. Taylor. This is the 5th book in the Bobiverse series, which starts with We Are Legion, We Are Bob. In the first book, Bob uploads his consciousness in a self-replicating von Neumann probe and goes out to explore space. He makes a bunch of clones of himself, and they all choose different names and have different personalities, and they set out to find what they can find. We get first contact with other sentient creatures. We find threats that might harm sentient life. In the 5th book, we are starting kind of a new arc, and we're getting more advancements in technology, which includes wormholes, and there is a new looming threat to humanity and some of the sentient creatures that humanity has met. I absolutely love it. It's quirky and fun and just such a propulsive read. These are really best on audiobook. Ray Porter is one of my favorite narrators, and he narrates this series, and he's also narrated Project Hail Mary, if you've read that one. Absolutely recommend if this sounds like anything you might enjoy. At number 7, I am putting Lola in the Mirror by Trent Dalton. This is part crime, part magical realism, which sounds like an odd mix, but it worked really well. We are following a 17-year-old girl who does not have a name. Names are dangerous when you're on the run. She and her mother live in an abandoned junkyard because when the girl was a baby, the mother tried to leave her abusive husband, and when he refused to let them leave, the mother killed him. So they have been on the run ever since. With no fixed address, it's really hard for them to get employment, and so they start selling drugs. One day, the protagonist and her mother see this runaway stroller with a baby in it headed straight for the river. The protagonist's mother jumps in the river to save the baby and is able to get the baby onto dry land before the mother is exhausted and drowns. This sets off a whole new search for the girl's identity. She wants to know who she was, who she is, and maybe find a way to get out of the drug business. The reason that it's partly magical realism is because our character has a magic mirror, and in the mirror there is a woman called Lola who kind of gives her advice when, shit has hit the fan. This book had me so tense. It was quite a page turner, and I absolutely loved it. I picked it up because I loved Trent Dalton's first book, Boy Swallows Universe, which I reread this year, and that's also a weird mix of crime and magical realism, and I would recommend both because they are absolutely fantastic. So speaking of crime, there's a bit of crime in my book for number 6, Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton. Burnham Wood is an eco-activist group, and one of the ways they protest is they find unused land and grow crops on it. So one day they are tending to the plants and a billionaire shows up and he finds their secret. Not only does he offer to keep their secret from the people who actually own this land, but he also offers them money to do more good and to create like a full-on charity. This really divides the group because they question the ethics of taking money from a billionaire when it seems to really go against their values. They're also quite suspicious of the billionaire. Why is he helping? Why is he keeping their secret? What is going on? There are so many mysteries in this book, and it is very propulsive. I don't think you can predict where it's going to go, and I think that the journey was wonderful. So I will only say one last thing, which is you will either love or hate the ending. It is quite divisive, but for me, I loved it. I thought it was the perfect way to end this book. At number 5, I am putting The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This really surprised me because I picked it up on a whim and it has just enchanted me all year. So this is a Sherlock and Watson retelling in a fantastical walled city. So we have our Watson character called Din. He has a magical ability which makes him an engraver, which means that with using a strong scent at the scene, he can then basically memorize everything that happened, all of the answers and the body language from his interviews with witnesses or suspects. And then he goes back to confer with Anna, who is our neurodiverse Sherlock character. They try to solve a murder. However, they have very, very little time because the wet season is coming up, and the reason they live in the walled cities is because these giant leviathans live outside the walls and can do a lot of damage. So the clock is ticking down, and there is a mad rush to figure out who murdered this person and why. The world building was quite intricate, the mystery was quite satisfying, and I cannot wait for more from this world. We should be getting the sequel in April of next year, and I can't wait. If you've read this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. In 4th place, I am putting The Accidental Salvation of Gracie Lee by Talia Tate Boner. This is a coming-of-age story about young Gracie Lee, a 10-year-old girl who is growing up in rural Arkansas in the 1970s. Her father is a very temperamental cotton farmer, and he is also an alcoholic and quite abusive. So Gracie decides to go to church and talk to her pastor to pray for her father. But the pastor misunderstands and thinks she wants to get saved, and so she does so to make her mom happy. Not a ton happens in this book. It's quite a slice of life, but we get to see this really realistic character learn some hard truths. She has to deal with poverty and abuse and bullying, and I loved her. I thought she was a very well-rounded character. I read this because it was often compared to my favorite book of all time, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. Both of them are coming of age stories. I definitely see the comparisons. And I think if you like one, you would probably like the other. Have you read either A Tree Grows in Brooklyn or The Accidental Salvation of Gracie Lee? Let me know your thoughts if you have. At number 3, I am placing The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. This is the first book in a science fiction trilogy, and I absolutely ate it up. A highly intelligent alien species called the Carricks one day invades a planet where humans are living. They kill most of the humans and enslave some of the rest. The Carricks are in a never-ending war trying to conquer all the species, and our group of humans that we follow are tasked with finding a way to create biocompatible food for all of the different slaves. We learn a ton about the different types of aliens, and I felt like the world building was quite immense. They also released a short story that takes place after this book called Live Suit, which I've already read, and I loved it. It was a bit of insight on how the humans are trying to fight back against the Carricks. Since they are so much more technologically advanced, humans are having to come up with some creative solutions. I can't wait for book 2. It doesn't have a date yet, but I will be picking up book 2 as soon as it comes out. In spot number 2, I am putting The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I actually could include the entire Broken Earth trilogy because I read all 3 this year, and all 3 were fantastic. I think they all won awards, each of them, and they should have. They are so good. But I will say I think The Fifth Season is the very best book. This is a mix of science fiction and fantasy. We are in a post-apocalyptic world. There are a bunch of different climate disasters which force humans to hunker down and try to survive until conditions get better. They create all of this lore about all of the different climate disasters, all of the different ways that they can try and mitigate some of the issues, and it's just so full of magic and also a post-apocalyptic setting. Not only is it the end of the world in general, but it is also the end of the world for our character called Esun. She has discovered that her husband has killed their 3-year-old son and has absconded with her daughter. Both she and her children are origines, which means they possess a magical ability to be able to sense and still different movements in the earth. You'd think that'd be quite a handy thing to have, but the origines are treated like second-class citizens. They are enslaved and sequestered in a lot of cases, and they are just treated horribly, which is why Esun has tried to keep the fact that she and her children are origins a secret. Her husband finds out and kills their son, and so she needs to go and try to rescue her daughter and get vengeance on her son. The history and the way the magic works was exquisite. We also have some really badass characters, and I absolutely love the way this trilogy ended. Endings are quite important to me, and if you end on kind of a sour note, that can kind of ruin some things for me. But this had a strong ending. It explained some of the choices from the earlier books, and overall I found incredibly satisfying. N.K. Jemisin is a new favorite author for me, and I plan to dive into her backlist in 2025. And lastly, at number 1, the very best fiction book I read this year was Anyone's Ghost by August Thompson. I got so attached to these characters. I just absolutely loved them. This is a coming-of-age story about 2 boys who meet and kind of create this toxic and obsessive relationship with one another, and how that meeting affected their life down the line. The very opening line is, "It took 3 car crashes to kill Jake." And we open up with the other guy, David, going to Jake's funeral and starting to reminisce on how they met one summer working at part-time. So, I mean, you know where the story is headed. Like, we know the ending because it's in the very beginning. But that didn't stop me from getting really attached to these characters and really dreading Jake's demise. This is a sad, queer story with really flawed characters, but I loved it so much, and I actually missed them as if they were real people when the book was over. The writing was beautiful, and I can't wait to see what the author puts out next. If you only read one book, this is the one I recommend. This is the very best book I read in 2024. Have you heard of it? I feel like this is an underrated gem. I have only heard one other person talking about it. So those are the best fiction books I read this year. What was the best fiction book you read this year? And are you interested in trying any of the ones on my list? Let's have a bookish chat down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.